Hello, everyone. Welcome to Brahma Talks, our monthly webinar series organized by the Grodzka Gate Theatre and Center from Lublin. My name is Agata Radkowska-Parka, and on behalf of the organizers, I would like to welcome you all to our meeting. It's a great pleasure to have you today with us. It's hard to believe that it's already the 11th webinar within that series. We've started a few months after the pandemic broke out, and it's been almost a year since then. We hope you are all safe and sound, and that very soon restrictions will be over. Traveling safe again, and we will have a chance to meet you in Lublin in person again. A short piece of information for those of you who are with us for the first time. The Grodzka Gate NN Theatre Center, or Brama Grodzka as we call it in Polish, is a municipal cultural center based in Lublin that is committed to the remembrance of Jewish community of our city. As for the technical aspects of this webinar, we are going to spend around 1 hour together. At the end of the meeting, there will be time around 10-15 minutes for questions from the audience. Please feel free to use the Q&A mode in the Click meeting room to ask questions. Or if you are viewing us on YouTube, then YouTube live chat. You are free to do so during the whole session, but note we will address those questions to our guests at the end of the conversation. And please feel free to use chat to make comments or to simply say hello. And finally, it's time to introduce today's guest. We have a great pleasure to host Sheva Zucker, a Yiddish teacher, a researcher, the author of the textbook Yiddish: An Introduction to the Language, Literature and Culture. For years, Sheva was an executive director of the League for Yiddish and the academic director of YIVO summer program in Yiddish language and literature and culture. Sheva also has a family connection to Lublin, which we will hear about, I hope, in a moment. Sheva, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. It's a great honor to have you today with us. The conversation will be led by my colleague, Piotr Nazaruk, who works here in Brama as educator, researcher, and curator of temporary exhibits. And what's more important for today's topic, he's a huge enthusiast of Yiddish language. So without further ado, Piotr, Sheva, the floor is yours.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Agata, for the introduction. And thank you so much, Sheva, for being with us, for accepting our invitation. And in just a minute, I'll start asking Sheva questions, but I would like to say just a few words. First of all, I would like to mention late Mr. Roman Whitman, whose funeral actually took place earlier today. Mr. Whitman, who was 88 years old, was the head of the Lublin Jewish community for years. He was also an active member of Lublin Cultural Social Association of Jews, and he was also probably the last native Yiddish speaker in Lublin. So it's a huge loss to the Jewish community in Lublin, but also to us at Grodzka Gate. We all knew him. We worked with him on various occasions. He was always very open, very friendly. He participated in most of our commemorative events, and he himself was a guardian of Lublin's Jewish heritage and Lublin's Jewish history. So it's also a great loss to the city of Lublin. Mr. Whitman was an engineer, and he actually designed and built most of Lublin bridges. And I would say that in a way, he himself was a bridge between Polishness and Jewishness. So therefore, he will be missed by many in Lublin and beyond. The second thing I would like to comment on is actually the title, the name of our today's webinar, the Goldene Keyt, or the golden chain. It's a beautiful Yiddish metaphor used by many Yiddish authors, found in various Yiddish sources, that is reflecting the uninterrupted transmission of Jewish tradition, heritage, culture from one generation to the next, where every chain link symbolizes a generation. And actually, the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about this Goldene Gate metaphor is YIVO, Institute for Jewish Research, that organizes its famous Yiddish summer program every year. And I had the pleasure and the privilege to be a student there, to study the Yiddish language there. And although Sheva was not my direct teacher, Sheva was, when I was there, Sheva was the head of the program. She was assigning us to the classes, leveling us. We were using her textbooks. It's volume 1, so I have it with me. So, you know, she was the boss of the program. So I had this image of YIVO, of students from all around the world, from Eastern, Western Europe, from the United States, Israel, etc., some exotic places, at least from, you know, my provincial Lublin perspective, and Sheva and other magnificent teachers teaching us the Yiddish language, but also its literature, its culture, and in a way forming new links in this chain of gold. So I thought that this expression would be a nice title for a meeting with renowned Yiddish teacher. Many of you probably know that about Sheva's work in the field of Yiddish education and Yiddish research, but maybe not all of you know that Sheva actually has a Lublin family connection. And maybe Sheva will start with that. Maybe you can tell us something about your Lublin family.
Sure. Okay. So my Lublin family, that's my father's side, the Zucker side, is actually an Ishbitze family. My father was born in Ishbitze in 1910. My grandfather was, I wonder if this is a Polish word. He was a braker in the forest. He was a forest surveyor. I mean, it's a Yiddish word, but I wonder where it comes from.
We probably use this word, but it's an archaic word in Polish.
Okay.
I believe.
So that's what he was. He worked in forests, and I think he moved where the trees were or where the forests were. So my dad lived in a number of different places, but he lived in Lublin for about 6 years, from 1922 to 1927, which were his teenage years. And so I think, as he describes them, were very formative years for him.
And what was his name? And
his name was Meir Zucker.
And do you know where they lived? Actually, we have a family photo of your family.
So yeah, yes, there they are. And my dad is the on the very left, the fellow standing, and below him is his mother, and next to him is his brother Matis, who perished, and the woman with the flower is his sister Heike, who I think the occasion and why she has the flower, she went to the Soviet Union and stayed there, and it's probably her goodbye is what I'm thinking. And then my uncle, who married my aunt, who's right below him, those two ended up in Winnipeg, Canada, where I was born. And I feel like there's somebody beside my uncle, but our pictures are blocking. And then, so my grandparents, who perished in Ishbitze, and the youngest daughter, Hanele, who perished with them. And then my dad's nephew, and then my aunt Molly, who came to Canada as well, whom we knew. So I don't know if there's somebody above Molly that I'm not seeing. I'm not sure. Okay. Yeah. So that picture was, I think, 1927 as well. But it is, as far as I know, it was Lublin. So my dad was 17. He looks older, but I guess kids looked older in those days. Okay.
So Sheva, you have, so that's the second photo. You actually don't know who's in the photo from what I understand.
Well, I know some. I know some, and I would love it if anybody, you in the audience, or recognizes anybody from your family, that would be great. So I do know this is my Muma Mindel, the Mime, my aunt, and this is my uncle who soon went to Palestine. And this is my namesake, or I'm her namesake. I never know how that works, but I'm named for her. That's Sheva, and her husband, Yitzchak, and their little girl, Ruja. All of them perished. And this is my aunt who went to the former Soviet Union to find a boyfriend and found another one. But anyway, but what this picture is, and somewhere I wrote that there's somebody called Gödel Goldberg, this gentleman. Can you see my cursor, or the cursor's only
No,
you can't.
It's only for us.
So up here in the top row next to my aunt is somebody called Gödel Goldberg. I don't know if he was family or not. There were Goldbergs in the family. And then there's somebody called Gewurz. But this was taken August 4th, 1927, and I have to read you what it says on the back. It was in Yiddish, and it says, Fahren Opfern von unser Choschiffster, Teierster, Chavete und Freund, Keyt Zucker, soll das Bild sein an Edes von ihr und allem ins Glück. Before the departure of our most esteemed and dear comrade and friend, Keyt Zucker, may this picture be a witness to her and all our happiness. And it just tears at my heart every time I read that, because I know that for most of them there wasn't that much happiness after, but yeah.
Yes, but going back to the 1920s, your family lived in an area we call Żmigród. Like it's both Rusałka and Zamojska streets are a part of this district, an old district called Żmigród. And actually here I have a photo of 3 Rusałka Street. I don't have any, like I couldn't find any pre-war photos of the building, but this is the building where your father lived, right?
Could be.
So this is from Google Street View, so it's a modern.
When we were there, I don't think there was a. Is that a parking lot? I don't think there was a parking spot there. It was just a building, but
just a building, and probably not renovated as it is today.
Probably not, and it was even then. And when my father lived there, across the street from the Circus. Is there still a Circus there?
No, I was actually when we were experiencing the technical problems, I was telling a story about this Circus, or it was also used as a summer theater,
right?
And it was quite an important place for Yiddish artists to perform and stage their plays. I also have two actually pre-war photos of Zamojska 14, and I believe that's the place where your grandparents lived, right?
Right.
So it's not very far away. It's interesting that they lived so close to each other. But I would like to ask you, because from what I understand, your father was quite an active Bundist. Like he worked in a printing business, right?
Right.
So maybe you can tell us how he started this work.
Okay, so he I guess came to Lublin when he was about 12, and there he went to a Jewish school, Darkei Noam, Ilpen Darkei Noam, which seemed to be, it sounds like during the day they had all Jewish subjects, and then for 3 hours in the evening they had Polish, geography, Polish literature, mathematics, whatever, the secular subjects. And then he went to a rather famous gymnasia called Speer's Gymnasia, which was a Jewish high school. And when he was 16, I don't know what class of gymnasia that would have made him, here would be about 10th grade, he decided to leave school. It sounds from his memoirs that it was his own decision because he felt like the family needed money, and that he would go and learn a trade. And he decided that he wanted, there was only one trade that he wanted to learn, and that was to be a printer, because he loved reading. And I think he felt that if he would be a printer, then he would be in contact with books all the time. And so that's what he did. And he went to, there was a printer called Keyt, whose printing shop was on Bernardinsky Street, I believe. And he went and he apprenticed at Keyt. And then Keyt also worked as a typesetter for the Tagblatt, or Tageblatt, I'm not sure what it was called then, but it was out of Lublin. And so I think that my dad also started working on that. So he actually didn't join the Bund, or it would have been the Zukunft, the youth organization, until he became a printer, although it was very much a part of his life because his older sister, Luba, who was 9 or 10 years older, was already in the Bund. So I think he was kind of known. And apparently, yes, I mean, the picture was sad about Lublin, but I feel like he had a very happy and active and somehow inspiring life in Lublin. And as he describes it, Rusalka wasn't really in the Jewish neighborhood. So they would have, I guess, because the Bund was always sort of conspirative and, you know, they had to do things in secret.
And sometimes illegal.
Pardon?
Sometimes illegal.
Illegal, right? So they would, their house, I guess, was a good place to have meetings because it wasn't right in the Jewish neighborhood. So there were a lot of meetings there, and he describes it as a big house. I think by today's standards, it probably wasn't so big. I think it maybe is 3 or 4 rooms, which doesn't seem big to me for a family with 8 kids, but be that as it may, by those days' standards, it was probably quite a big, well-appointed house. And so various visitors from the Bund and speakers would stay at their house. So he was he was involved even before he was officially involved. And apparently when he went to become a Zukunftist, they kind of said, what? You mean you're not a member yet? How could it be? So yeah, I think it was a very exciting time. I think the Bund was very active, and they had different groups, literature groups and political groups, and they met frequently, and there was, sports and whatnot. So I believe that, as he said, these are kind of memoirs that I taped him. He says, so when you ask me when I became politically aware, I would have to say during my years in Lublin. And that's why I consider myself a Lubliner. My formative years from when I was 12 or 13 until 1927, when he would have been 17, when my parents moved to Lemberg, were in Lublin. So yes, for sure, it was a very important chapter for him. And I assume also living in Izbica when they did, that Lublin was kind of the big city that you went to on occasion. So yeah, it was a big part of his life.
But being a member of the Bund didn't only mean to go to like meetings and have fun with other Bundists or Zukunftists. Like, did he truly believe in the Bund's ideology? What was his attitude towards Bundism?
Yeah. Okay. So just on one foot, in case some people don't know. So the Bund at that time was a socialist organization, and Yiddish was very, very important. First, as a kind of a means to an end, because this was the workers' language. And so, how do you reach the worker? And then I think over time it became an end in and of itself, so that the development of Yiddish culture and literature was very, very important. Yes, I think he definitely believed in the ideology. I mean, for example, his younger sister was a Zionist, was much less inclined towards Yiddish. But he and Luba, the older ones, were very, they were big Yiddishists, and that stayed with him. And he was a socialist, whatever that meant in those times, and continued in Canada to be active in the, on a local level in the New Democratic Party, which was the Socialist Party of Canada. So for sure, and I believe he believed in the Bund's Doigkeit, the here-ness, the principle that this is where my life is, and this is where my Jewish life is, and this is where I'm going to live it. Yeah, I suspect that had there not been a Holocaust, at least in his mind, there was no sense of leaving Poland to go to America, and as he describes life in Poland, it was very Jewish life. Yes, there was anti-Semitism there, but it was very rich and full. And I think the cultural and literary life especially were really blossoming, and this was very important to him.
And I remember reading or watching actually an interview with you. I think it was an interview made by someone from the Yiddish Book Center. And I remember you mentioned that that he had been very strict with his ideals. Like from what I understood, he considered himself rather a secular person. He was not interested in like religious life. Jewish religious life in when he was in Lublin or in Lemberg, and he never went to a synagogue, right? He didn't consider a synagogue as a place where culture and heritage, not only religion, can be transmitted.
It can be, but not for him.
Not for him.
So okay. So that's a whole complicated thing. When he was born into a Hasidic family, and they were Hasidim, Radziner Hasidim, until he was about 10 years old, where when my grandfather decided that he was no longer religious. So I think it was very much in keeping with the zeitgeist, with the time, that my father was a man of principle, and he believed if I don't believe in God, why should I go into the synagogue to speak to him? And I think that probably worked in Poland. It was more problematic in Canada, and he had nothing against religion for other people. I mean, he in fact, I think, probably thought it could be a very beautiful thing, but he no longer believed, and so he thought, he would be hypocritical. And I think, I mean, I don't hold that view, but I think that was fairly common for secularists of the time, that they had this principle that they had to assert, and somehow it might, make them unkosher if they went to synagogue.
I find it interesting because often when people visit us, for example, at the Grodzka Gate, they associate Jewish life in pre-war Poland with this very ultra-Orthodox Hasidic way of life. Yet secularism and such currents were quite common among especially young Jews, like young workers in pre-war Poland. Actually, I have a photo or a clipping from Lubliner Tugblatt. In Lubliner Yiddish, it was called Tugblatt, and it's from 1927. So I'm not sure whether your father was still here. But
yes,
that's how
yes.
this newspaper looked like when he was an apprentice typesetter working with cats, right?
Right.
And here, just for our audience, I have a photo of they are not members of Zukunft. I made a mistake. They are members of SKIF, Sozialistischer Kinderverband, so a association for smaller, for kids, actually affiliated with the Bund, and a photo of Lublin Morgenstern team, gymnastic team. As you can see, both girls and boys were wearing almost the same T-shirts, so it was also a very progressive, I would say, movement within the Bund, Zukunft, SKIF, and this galaxy of organizations. So we don't have much time. Actually, we have just a few more minutes. But I would like to ask you about your visit to Lublin in the 80s, right? In the 1980s.
Right.
So how did it happen? Why did you came? Why did you visit Lublin?
Why did I come? Okay, so it was 1985, and it was sort of our honeymoon. Actually, we got married, Sandy and I, my husband, in 84, and we were both very interested in going to actually to Russia at the time, where I had a cousin, the son of the woman that I said who went to Russia. So we wanted to meet him, and we wanted to see the places where my father had lived. His father was also from Poland, but then it was Ukraine and you couldn't get in. So we concentrated on Poland. And of course, for somebody who studies Yiddish literature, I mean, going to Poland is kind of a natural thing. So we concentrated on Warsaw, Lublin, and Krakow, and Izbice, and then another town, Zaklikov, and of course, Auschwitz. And I didn't go to Majdanek. My husband did. I sort of had enough. But unfortunately, there's not that much I can tell you about Lublin. I remember that the city, the old part where most things was under remont. It seemed to be they were rebuilding, and there were very few parts you could even get into. We could go to Rusalka, and we did. We didn't get into the building, but we did hear from, there was an old woman who remembered a kupiec, lumber a merchant of woods. So I guess that was my grandfather. You know, I mean, at that time you could still meet people that remembered people. Today, I think it would be impossible. So that was kind of exciting, but we didn't have the sense, or we didn't know how we could connect with a Jewish community if there was one there, or have a tour. I just remember seeing the building where the yeshiva of the Chachmei Lublin was, which I think was then a clinic, or I can't remember.
It was a university back then,
medical
university.
Oh, medical. Okay, I knew it had something to do with medicine. Yeah, so unfortunately, it seemed like we didn't get to Lublin at a great time, because we didn't get to see much of the old city, unfortunately. Yeah, and there was no Brahma Grodzka to take us around. So
no, not yet. Not yet. Not yet. I mentioned Mr. Whitman earlier in the beginning of our discussion, the last known native Yiddish speaker in Lublin. But you, Sheva, you live in New York and work in New York, a city with thousands of native Yiddish speaker. I mean, mainly the Hasidic community, but also more non-Hasidic, more secular Yiddish speakers. How did it start for you? Like, why did you decide to dedicate yourself and your life into the into Yiddish language, into the Yiddish language?
Okay, so I wasn't always from New York. I'm actually from Canada, as I think you know. But even here, I mean, the last Yiddish speakers are dying. I mean, apart from the Hasidic community, which is, something else, but it's happening, and one day there will just be the last. Are we okay, Piotr?
We are okay. We are okay.
Yeah, okay. I guess I always, growing up in our home, and my sister and I went, we had a Yiddish day school in Winnipeg, Parrot Shul, and my mother also was, I would say, a lover of Yiddish. She is Canadian born, but she was a fluent speaker, and she'd gone to this school, and we were sent to the school. I mean, which explains nothing because there were 600 children at the school at the time. So, and most of them didn't end up being Yiddish teachers, but I always felt something for the language. And I remember this feeling as early as second grade that in English, we had these books that were to learn to read that were very sort of pleasant and kind of silly. They lived on Pleasant Street, and they had a dog and a cat, and everything was jolly. And the Yiddish books were different.
How so?
Well, so nobody certainly lived on Pleasant Street, that I can tell you. And we learned things as early as second grade. I mean, I know that we knew about the Holocaust. I'm not sure that it was taught, but people's families and we just knew things. And in Jewish history, I think in second or third grade, our textbook began, Jews today in Yiddish are a people of 11 or 12 million. We used to be a people of 18 million. And then a third of the people was wiped out. So these things make an impression if you're paying attention. And I just always felt that what we were learning in Yiddish was somehow deeper, I remember wondering, nobody ever said to us, our teachers never said, would you go on Kiddush Hashem? Would you, die? It's a funny expression for the sake of God. We were a secular school. It didn't really matter. That question, I think, was there for us as Jewish children. How much would you sacrifice because you are a Jew? And that question has been with me since I was about 7 or 8 years old. So that's how. I mean, in English classes, you never were made to think about dying for because you were a Canadian. So I always felt that there was just that Yiddish put me as a Jew in touch with the deeper questions of life, and I think because of that I was drawn to it.
We have covers of Afn Shvel magazine that Sheva edited for years. Actually, there's the cover of the first issue and the last issue.
The magazine is 80 years old.
Yes, but you edited, and the last issue you edited from winter, spring 2020. You said that the condition of Yiddish in New York is not so great. On the other hand, you have Hasidic community. I remember when I was at YIVO, we had a meeting with some Hasidic couple. They visited us, and it was a chance to have a chat with them. So students were quite excited. They were able to speak Yiddish with native Yiddish speakers that were not their YIVO teachers. And I remember that I think you were actually the only person that was a bit maybe not so excited about what the Hasidic couple was telling us, because they were telling quite enlightened stories. I would say that they would accept if their kids were, I don't know, like gay or not interested in being Hasidic, etc. So it was quite. But I'm just I'm trying to ask you, like, is the fact that you had such a strong Hasidic Yiddish-speaking community in Lublin give any hope for the Yiddish language, or maybe the future of Yiddish should be searched for somewhere else, like in more secular institutions like YIVO or League for Yiddish or other institutions? What's your opinion on this?
Okay, so I really can't remember my reaction to that couple, so I can't really say. I think I was, when they gave this impression of everything's fine and we're as free as we want and we can say what we want, it wasn't really true, and I knew it. I know that the woman, through another one of the teachers who was closer, that they were told if they did X, Y, and Z, their kids would be kicked out of the cheder, for example. You know, so the picture that they tried to present to the outside world wasn't, maybe they wished it were true, but it wasn't quite the truth. So just to say, I think Yiddish in New York is actually doing great. It's doing very well, which is a very different question than how many native speakers are left. You know, I think we're seeing a real upsurge, maybe thanks to the pandemic in a funny way, you know, but definitely the numbers of people that are coming to Yiddish events and, you know, on Zoom is bigger than it ever was. So everybody is feeling very optimistic. I think that there's not one answer for Yiddish. Obviously, I mean, I think that it is pretty strong in a certain way in Hasidic circles, which, you know, sadly doesn't have much effect on my life as a person who's, I'm not like my father, but, you know, I do go to synagogue and I'm, you know, much more traditional, but that's not a world that I really interact with in a, you know, in a normal sense. And, you know, nor do I necessarily care to. I mean, if it happened, that would be great, but, you know, these are not my people. So I think I see Yiddish taking, you know, different, very, you know, different directions. And I would hate to say it has to be through, I mean, for sure that as a living language, one can't deny that it's much, much stronger in Hasidic circles. There's absolutely no question about that. And so maybe that's where the main point of the future will be. But I hope that for people that can't be part of those circles because they don't want to live that way, that organizations like the YIVO, the League for Yiddish, the Workers' Circle, you know, whatever, provide a place for them to explore Yiddish, to make it somehow a part of their lives. There are many ways. There's not just one way.
You know, like I remember when being in New York, we went to see Tevye der Musiker in Yiddish, but also I went to see an obscure play. It was a Yiddish translation of a Hebrew play called Izoine from Ohio.
Oh, right, yes.
The whore from
Right, the New
Ohio.
Yiddish rep, yes.
Yes. So, do you think, because this experience with Izoine from Ohio was quite refreshing to me, like it was something new, something modern, something naughty. Do you think that actually we can expect some kind of revival of well, Yiddish theater, Yiddish cinema, maybe? What's your opinion on this subject?
Well, I think it's happening. I think that actually that maybe the second before the last issue that I edited of Afn Shvel, we did an issue on films, and there's a lot more Yiddish in films than there used to be. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that in general, people have become more accepting of subtitles. And so, they'll watch a foreign movie. So now they can watch a foreign movie that's got Yiddish, like Shtisel, for example, big Israeli sensation. So I think we're definitely seeing many more films that have some Yiddish, that are Yiddish inspired. Yeah, I mean, it's never going to be huge box office, I don't think, but for sure. And I don't know, from somewhere there seems to be an audience. I think because the ability to have titles, to have, super titles has really changed Yiddish theater. I mean, originally it was you just went if you could understand it. Then they tried a little bit with earphones for a while. I don't know how the experience was, but clearly not good enough. And then when this ability to show the words, that brought thousands of people. I mean, if people were acting only for those that understood Yiddish, it would not be a viable thing. But I think now that people are getting used to the idea, like with opera, that you can read what's happening, it's really changing things. And I think the new Yiddish rep is trying to do things that are new and innovative and not necessarily only about Jewish life. Which is, it's one can question that if that's the purpose of Yiddish, but they find it relevant, and so that's good. I mean, people have to do the things that mean something to them.
We have a few questions.
Okay.
2 questions from our friend Liora Tech. Liora asks, was Yiddish spoken in Sheva's home growing up?
Yes. I have to say more that we grew up listening to Yiddish. My sister and I seldom answered in Yiddish, big confession, but my father generally spoke to us in Yiddish, for sure. And, when we'd get together with our aunts and uncles, I mean, the older people were always speaking Yiddish. And all the kids understood, even if we answered in English. It just kind of went, back and forth. So yeah, but we also went to the Yiddish school. So, we had at school we had to speak Yiddish. There was no choice about it. So yeah.
And a question from Monica Alasa. Sheva, which language do you speak on daily basis with your close ones?
It depends which close ones. So I did speak Yiddish mostly with my kids. They're grown now and out of the house, so I don't see them on a daily basis. With my husband, I speak English.
And are your kids interested in like developing further their Yiddish skills?
Yes, on some level. My older daughter is, she's a social worker, but she's teaching Yiddish in Chicago, where she lives. And my younger daughter was actually in some of the productions of the New Yiddish Rep. So yeah, they're certainly, they like Yiddish. And have not turned against it. And actually, one of the best moments of my life was when my older daughter said, "Mom, you didn't speak to Yiddish enough to us." And I thought, really? I was always so worried that they grew up in North Carolina. They were the only ones, that they would feel strange and, nobody else around them was. And so to have that criticism was very good.
But it's easy to blame the mother.
Always. It's her fault.
And another question from Liora. It's a linguistic question, actually. Can Sheva speak to how Yiddish from different places differ from each other, and which one is taught in places like YIVO?
Okay, so there are a number of major dialects of Yiddish. There's the Central Yiddish, which is the Polish Yiddish. There's the Northern, which is what we call Litvish Yiddish, which would take in not just Lithuania, but Belarus and the Baltics, Latvia. What's the third one? Estonia. And then there's the more Southern Yiddish, the Transcarpathian, and Bukovina and so forth. So it's, I can't do this on one foot, but in some cases it's a difference of sound, like we saw with the Tugblatt, whereas we write Tugblatt, and that would be more what's called standard Yiddish. So Polish Jews would say Tugblatt, right? Or Git Morgen as opposed to Gut Morgen. So there's difference of vowels. There's also difference. The standard Yiddish that is generally taught at YIVO was something that was developed in between the wars in Poland or in Eastern Europe. And it's not that people at YIVO have a sense that this is somehow better. Not at all. But I think particularly in America, where people came together and they were from all different places. I mean, you could have a Yiddish class in New York or even with children, with, people from homes from Belarus, from Lita, from Poland, whatever. So how do you teach all these people together where there's not really one dialect as there usually is? If you're from this place, you speak this way. But that's not sort of what was happening with Yiddish. So the YIVO Yiddish, shall we say, sounds closest to Lithuanian Yiddish in terms of the vowels, except the I don't know how detailed you want me to get, but instead of saying broit, Litvak would say breit, and instead of teure, they would say tere. And then sometimes they kind of mix up the sh's and the s's and the ch's and all the sibilants. So instead of saying Shabbos, they might say Sabbath. It's often called Sabbastika lesson, the Shabbos language, because they mixed up all the sh's. But other than that, the vowels are pretty much as we write Yiddish. The grammar is actually very, very different. I won't go into it. I won't bore people. Yeah, so this was kind of, this mixture dialect was taken as the standard Yiddish. And the good thing about it is that the sound of it is closest to the way Yiddish is spelled. So that makes it easiest, I think, for students. It's practical because it makes it easiest for students to learn to read it. But, this by no means is the majority dialect anymore, because Hasidim are clearly the majority and most of them don't speak this way. So have I answered your question, Liora, or do you need more?
I think that the answer was perfect. Yes, thank you,
Okay.
Liora wrote. So actually, maybe some of you know that like a month ago, I think Duolingo has released the famous app has released the Yiddish course, and actually they were debating, and it was a huge debate from what I understand, which dialect should they choose And I think they've chosen the Hungarian dialect because of the Hasidic communities. Most of them speak Hungarian Yiddish these days. So it's still it's the same debate like in the 19th century and in the 20th century, when the theater, Yiddish theater, had to develop some sort of universal, more universal Yiddish theater dialect. That's the case with languages without states, like without regulatory institutions. I think we don't have much more time, so if some of you would like to ask a question, you're welcome. Beata Mazurek actually wrote that she studied Yiddish a few years ago with Sheva Zucker's textbook for beginners. So Beata, hopefully okay, so if we don't have any more questions, Agata will probably join us.
Thank you so much for this inspiring conversation. I'm so happy we managed with the technical issue. I'm sorry for them, but I'm extremely happy we managed, and we had the chance to spend this hour together and hear your conversation. I wish we had more time to continue and to explore the world of Yiddish language and culture with both of you. So thank you so much for your time, for your engagement, and Sheva, thank you for accepting.
And if I may say just one more thing, Sheva will actually be a guest of a webinar about Salomea Perl,
yes,
organized by League for Yiddish. And Salomea Perl was a Polish
Workers' Circle.
Workers' Circle. I'm sorry, I confused them. Salomea Perl was a Polish and then Yiddish author, and she originated from Łomża, but she spent her teenage years in Lublin. So if you are interested in Yiddish literature, Sheva and Lublin, you had to find Salomea Perl event with Sheva.
Yeah, I'd love to see you. Fascinating. This woman just emerged, sort of. So it's a very interesting story. Yeah.
Thanks, Piotr, for that recommendation. And Sheva, remember, you're always welcome to Lublin. A lot has changed since mid-80s, so you are really welcome to come to Lublin and visit us here in Brama. And before we finish, I have a few short announcements for our audience. I hope you are receiving our newsletter in English. But if not, I strongly recommend you to sign up to get updates about our future Brama Talks meetings, as well as news about projects, our work, people, etc. We are sending it once per month, so no unneeded spam, only updates from Brama and from Lublin. I'm pasting a link now on chat for those of you who would like to sign up. And if you received the last newsletter, you probably read about the study conducted by a Lubliner, Dwora Trachtenberg, titled Our Jewish Lublin Roots, What Do They Mean to Us? We encourage all of you to take part in this study. You can read more on our website, and you will also find a direct contact to Dwora there. So if you have any questions, please contact her directly. And last but not least, I would like to invite you for the next Brama Talks, which is planned for June 17th. We will have an amazing guest, Rose Lipschitz, Lubliner, a Holocaust survivor, an amazing speaker who will share her memories from Lublin as she was born and spent her childhood here. Some of you who've been to the Lubliner reunion in 2017 probably met Rose. So you know what I mean when I say you don't want to miss that meeting. All details will be included in our next newsletter. So another reason to sign up. So thanks again to both of you for the conversation. Thank you to the audience for your time, and have a nice afternoon, evening. Stay safe, and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.